The cool morning air felt good on Ayana's skin as she knelt by the clear stream. Water rushed over the smooth rocks, making a gentle sound that usually calmed her mind. She dipped her family's clothes into the cold water, rubbing them clean against the flat stones her grandmother had taught her to use. Her baby boy slept peacefully in his cradleboard, hanging safely from a nearby tree branch. The little one had been fussy all night, but now he rested quietly. Ayana smiled as she watched his tiny chest rise and fall. Soon her husband would return from his hunting trip with fresh meat for their family. The sun was just starting to paint, the sky pink and orange when she heard something that made her blood freeze. Horses, many horses. The sound came fast and hard, not like the gentle pace of Apache riders returning home. Ayana dropped the wet shirt in her hands and stood up quickly. Through the morning mist, she could see dark shapes moving toward their small camp. Blue uniforms. Soldiers. Her heart started beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She grabbed her baby from the tree and held him close to her chest. The little boy woke up and started to cry, as if he could feel his mother's fear. Around their camp, other women were doing the same thing, gathering their children and looking for places to hide. The soldiers rode into their peaceful camp like a storm. They shouted orders in English that Ayana didn't understand, but their actions spoke louder than words. They weren't here to talk. They weren't here to trade. They were here to take everything. One soldier jumped off his horse right in front of Ayana's family wickiup. The traditional home that her husband had built with his own hands looked so small, next to the tall man in uniform. The soldier pushed aside the deer hide that covered their doorway and went inside without asking. Ayana wanted to run to him and tell him to stop, but her legs wouldn't move. She watched as he threw out their belongings like they were trash. Her grandmother's cooking pots landed in the dirt with loud crashes. The beautiful blanket her mother had woven for her wedding got tossed into a growing pile. More soldiers were doing the same thing to every family's home. They took bows and arrows, but they also took things that had nothing to do with fighting. They grabbed ceremonial clothes that were only worn during special prayers. They took children's toys made from carved wood. They even took the dried foods that families had worked hard to prepare for winter. An older soldier with gray hair seemed to be in charge. He pointed at different things and his men would grab them. When he pointed at the pile of blankets and clothes, 2 soldiers started loading everything onto their pack horses. "Please," Ayana whispered. But the word came out so quietly that nobody heard her. These weren't just clothes and blankets to her family. The red blanket had been made by her aunt who died last winter. The beaded shirt was what her father wore when he married her mother. Every piece held memories and stories. Her baby cried louder now, and one of the soldiers looked in her direction. His eyes were cold and showed no feeling. To him, she wasn't a mother trying to protect her child. She was just another problem to deal with. Other families were running now. She could see women carrying babies just like her, heading toward the rocks and trees where they might find safety. Some of the older children ran ahead, their small legs moving as fast as they could. The soldier near her wickiup came out carrying her husband's hunting tools and her few pieces of jewelry. These were the things that proved her family's place in the tribe, their history, their identity. Now they were just objects in a stranger's hands. Smoke started rising from the far side of the camp. The soldiers weren't just taking things. They were burning what they left behind. The smell reached Ayana's nose and made her sick to her stomach. That smoke carried away the scent of sage and sweetgrass that always made their homes feel peaceful. She knew she had to move. Her husband wasn't here to protect them. Her father and brothers were away with the hunting party. She was alone with her baby, and staying here meant danger for both of them. Holding her son tight against her body, Ayana turned and ran toward the rocky hills. Her bare feet found their way over stones and around thorny bushes. She had walked these paths since she was a little girl, but now they felt different. Now they were escape routes instead of pleasant walks. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of her world being destroyed, voices calling out in fear, horses moving fast, things breaking and crashing to the ground. The peaceful morning by the stream felt like it had happened in a different life. As she climbed higher into the rocks, she turned back once to look at her home. Orange flames were eating the wickiups now. Thick black smoke rose into the clean morning air. Everything her family owned was either burning or being carried away by strangers. Her baby had stopped crying and was looking at her with his dark eyes. He was too young to understand what was happening, but somehow he seemed to know that his mother needed to be strong. Ayana kissed his forehead and promised him quietly that she would keep him safe, even though she had no idea how. The sound of the soldiers was getting farther away now, but Ayana kept climbing. She needed to find a place where they could hide until the danger passed. She needed to figure out what to do next. Most of all, she needed to find a way to survive with nothing but the clothes on her back and the baby in her arms. The morning that had started so peacefully was now the beginning of the hardest journey of her life. The rocks cut into Ayana's feet as she climbed higher into the hills. Each step hurt, but she couldn't stop. Her baby had grown heavy in her arms, and her back ached from carrying him for so long. The sun was getting hotter, and sweat dripped down her face. She found a small cave hidden behind some thick bushes. It wasn't very deep, but it would keep them out of sight. Ayana crawled inside and set her baby down on the hard ground. He looked up at her with wide eyes, probably wondering why they weren't in their comfortable home. The cave smelled like dust and old leaves. It was nothing like the sweet smell of sage that always filled their wickiup. Ayana tried to make the space as comfortable as possible, using her torn skirt to create a soft spot for her baby to lie on. From their hiding place, she could still see smoke rising from where their camp used to be. The gray clouds drifted across the blue sky like sad ghosts. She wondered if any of the other families had escaped. Were her friends safe? What about the elderly people who couldn't run fast? As the day went on, her baby started to get fussy. He was hungry, and Ayana knew why. She tried to feed him, but her body wasn't making enough milk. The fear and running had affected her, and now her son would suffer for it. The little boy's cries echoed in the small cave. Ayana rocked him gently and sang the quiet songs her mother had taught her. But nothing seemed to help. His cries grew weaker as the hours passed, which scared her even more than when he cried loudly. When night came, the cave became cold and dark. Ayana had no blankets, no fire, and no food. She held her baby close to her body, trying to keep him warm with just her own heat. Outside, she could hear strange sounds, night birds, small animals moving through the bushes, and the wind whistling through the rocks. She closed her eyes but couldn't sleep. Every sound made her think the soldiers were coming back. Every shadow looked like a person moving toward their hiding place. Her mind kept going back to the morning, seeing her possessions thrown into the dirt over and over again. The worst part was not knowing where her husband was. Had he seen the smoke from far away? Was he trying to find her? Or had something terrible happened to him too? These questions spun around in her head like a storm. By the second day, Ayana knew they were in serious trouble. Her baby was getting weaker and cried less often. That wasn't a good sign. Babies who don't cry much are often babies who don't have the strength to cry. She needed to find help, but who would help an Apache woman? She had heard stories about some of the white settlers in the area. Most of them feared or hated Apache people. They believed all the bad things they heard about her tribe without trying to learn the truth. But there were a few, very few, who seemed different. Her father had once told her about trading with some ranchers who treated Apache people fairly. They didn't try to cheat or threaten. They looked Apache people in the eyes when they talked, showing respect. But those men lived far from here, and she wasn't sure she could find them. The sun was high and hot when Ayana made her decision. Staying in the cave meant watching her baby get weaker until he died. Walking into the unknown meant taking a big risk, but at least it was a chance. She wrapped her baby in what was left of her torn shawl and started walking. Her feet were cut and sore, but she forced them to keep moving. She followed animal paths that led toward water, hoping to find a stream or spring. The land around her was beautiful but harsh. Red rocks rose up like giant fingers pointing at the sky. Cactus plants showed her where water might be found underground. Birds flew overhead, riding the hot air currents, but beauty couldn't feed a hungry baby or heal cut feet. Ayana needed practical help, and she needed it soon. She tried to remember everything her grandmother had taught her about surviving in the desert. Look for green plants that meant water was nearby. Follow the paths that animals used. Stay in shade during the hottest part of the day. As she walked, she saw signs that other people had been in this area recently. Horse tracks in the soft sand. The remains of a small fire. Broken branches where someone had pushed through thick bushes. These could be Apache tracks from other families who escaped. Or they could be from the soldiers who destroyed her home. Either way, it meant she wasn't alone in this vast landscape. Somewhere out there, other people were walking these same paths, looking for safety or looking for trouble. Her baby made small sounds that weren't quite cries. Ayana looked down at his little face and saw that his lips were getting dry. She had been giving him tiny drops of water from the few small pools she found, but it wasn't enough. He needed milk and she needed food to make milk. The afternoon shadows were getting longer when she smelled something that gave her hope. Smoke. But this wasn't the thick black smoke of burning homes. This was the thin white smoke of a cooking fire. Someone was making food nearby. Ayana's heart started beating faster, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from hope mixed with worry. Whoever was making that fire could save her baby's life, or they could be the last people she and her son would ever see. She followed the smell of smoke, moving carefully from rock to rock so she wouldn't be seen. Each step brought her closer to an unknown future. In her arms, her baby slept quietly, trusting his mother to make the right choice. The sun was starting to set, painting the rocks around her red and gold. Soon it would be dark again, and they would face another cold night with no food and no shelter. This might be their last chance. Ayana took a deep breath and kept walking toward the smoke, toward whatever fate was waiting for them beyond the next hill. The smell of smoke led Ayana over a small hill and down toward a valley she had never seen before. As she got closer, she could hear the sounds of cattle moving around and drinking water. Her heart jumped with excitement. Where there were cattle, there was usually water for people too. She crept behind some large rocks and looked down into the valley. Below her was a beautiful lake surrounded by tall cottonwood trees. The water sparkled blue and clean in the late afternoon sun. Cattle stood in the shallow parts, drinking their fill after a long, hot day. On the far side of the lake, she could see a man sitting by a small fire. He was alone, which surprised her. Most travelers in this dangerous territory moved in groups for safety. This man seemed comfortable being by himself. Ayana studied him carefully from her hiding place. He was white, probably around her father's age, with gray starting to show in his brown hair. His clothes were simple, worn pants, a faded shirt, and boots that had seen many miles. He didn't look like a soldier or a wealthy rancher. He looked like a working man. The man was cooking something in a small pot over his fire. The smell made Ayana's stomach growl loudly. She hadn't eaten anything in 2 days, and the scent of real food was almost painful. Her baby stirred in her arms, probably smelling the food too. She watched as the man got up and walked to the edge of the lake. He filled a metal cup with water and drank deeply, then filled it again. The simple act of drinking clean water looked like the most wonderful thing in the world to Ayana. This was her moment to decide. She could stay hidden and hope the man would leave, then try to catch some of the water and maybe find scraps of food. Or she could take the biggest risk of her life and ask for help. The man walked back to his fire and sat down again. That's when Ayana noticed something that made her feel a little bit of hope. Near his saddle, she could see what looked like trading goods, blankets, small metal pots, and other items that suggested he might be used to dealing with different kinds of people. Her baby made a small sound, and the man's head turned toward the rocks where she was hiding. Ayana froze, holding her breath. Had he heard them? The man stood up slowly and looked in her direction for a long moment. "I know someone's there," he said in a voice that was firm but not angry. "Come out where I can see you. I won't hurt you if you don't mean harm to me." Ayana's mind raced. He had spoken in English, but his tone wasn't threatening. Still, she had heard too many stories about what happened to Apache people who trusted white strangers. But looking down at her baby's pale face, she knew she didn't have a choice. Slowly, she stood up from behind the rocks. The man's hand moved toward his gun, but he didn't draw it. His eyes went wide when he saw her. A young Apache woman holding a baby, both of them clearly in bad shape. "Well, I'll be," he said quietly. "Ma'am, you look like you've been through hell." Ayana didn't understand all his words, but she understood his tone. It wasn't the voice of someone who wanted to hurt her. It was the voice of someone who was surprised and maybe even concerned. She started walking down the hill toward him, moving slowly so he wouldn't think she was attacking. Her legs shook with each step, partly from weakness and partly from fear. This could be the decision that saved her baby's life, or the decision that ended both their lives. As she got closer, the man could see how bad her condition really was. Her clothes were torn and dirty. Her feet were cut and bleeding. Her face was thin from not eating, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Sweet Mother of God," he whispered. "What happened to you?" The man's name was Thomas McClure, though Ayana didn't know that yet. He had been ranching in this territory for 15 years, ever since he came from Scotland looking for a new life. He had seen plenty of hard times and plenty of people in trouble, but something about this young mother touched his heart. Thomas had learned some Apache words over the years from trading with peaceful bands. He knew enough to say simple things, though he wasn't sure how much this woman would understand. "Water?" he asked, pointing to the lake and then to her. Ayana nodded eagerly. "Yes," she said in English, one of the few English words she knew well. Thomas filled his metal cup and brought it to her. She drank it so fast that some spilled down her chin. Then she looked at him with desperate eyes and pointed to her baby. "Baby need," she said, struggling with the English words. Thomas understood immediately. The baby needed milk and the mother needed food to make milk. He had seen this problem before with cattle. Stressed mothers couldn't feed their young. He went back to his fire and ladled some of the soup he was cooking into a bowl. It was simple food, just beef and vegetables, but it was hot and nourishing. He brought it to Ayana and gestured for her to eat. She looked at him with surprise. In her experience, white people didn't share food with Apache people. They certainly didn't show kindness to Apache women traveling alone. But here was this stranger offering her exactly what she needed most. "Thank you," she said, using another English phrase she had learned. As Ayana ate the warm soup, Thomas studied her more carefully. She was young, probably not much older than his own daughter would have been if she had lived. Her clothes suggested she came from a family of some importance. The beadwork, though dirty now, was very fine. But what had happened to her? Why was she alone with a baby in the middle of nowhere? Thomas had heard about the recent military actions against Apache camps. He had mixed feelings about those actions. He understood the fear that settlers felt, but he also knew that most Apache people just wanted to live their lives in peace. Looking at this exhausted mother holding her weak baby, Thomas realized he was seeing the human cost of the conflicts that raged across the territory. This wasn't about politics or land rights anymore. This was about a mother who needed help to keep her child alive. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and Thomas knew he had a decision to make. He could give this woman some food and water and send her on her way. That would be the safe thing to do. Or he could offer her real help, the kind of help that might cause problems with his neighbors and the authorities. As he watched Ayana feed tiny drops of the soup broth to her baby, Thomas made his choice. Some things were more important than playing it safe. After Ayana finished the soup, she felt a little stronger. The warm food had given her energy, but she knew this wasn't enough. Her baby was still weak and they had nowhere to go. She needed to find a way to ask this kind stranger for more help. She pointed to her torn and dirty clothes, then to her baby's thin face. Thomas watched her carefully, trying to understand what she was trying to tell him. She seemed to be explaining something important, but the language barrier made it difficult. Ayana took a deep breath and tried to remember the English words she had heard traders use. She pointed toward the direction where her camp used to be, then made a sweeping motion with her hands. "Soldiers," she said clearly. That was a word she had learned from listening to white people talk. Thomas nodded. He understood that word and it explained a lot. "Soldiers came to your camp?" he asked. "Yes," Ayana replied. Then she struggled to find more words. She pointed to her clothes again to the baby and then made a taking motion with her hands. "They took your things?" Thomas guessed. Ayana's eyes lit up with relief. He was starting to understand. She nodded eagerly and then said the words that would stay with Thomas for the rest of his life. "They stole my clothes, rancher." The way she said it wasn't just about the clothes themselves. Thomas could hear the pain in her voice, the loss that went much deeper than just missing garments. She was talking about her dignity, her family's possessions, everything that made her feel like a human being deserving of respect. She continued trying to explain, using the few English words she knew mixed with Apache words and hand gestures. She pointed to herself, then to her baby, then made a crying motion. She showed him how empty her hands were, how she had nothing left to give her child. Thomas felt something twist in his chest as he watched this young mother struggle to ask for help. He thought about his own wife who had died giving birth to their daughter years ago. He thought about the daughter who had lived only a few days. If they had survived, they might have been in a situation like this someday, desperate and alone. "You need clothes for the baby?" he asked, pointing to the little one. Ayana nodded, but then she gestured to herself too. Her own clothes were barely holding together after days of running through rocks and thorns. More importantly, She needed clean, warm clothes if she was going to be able to care for her baby properly. Thomas looked around at his simple camp. He had some extra clothes in his pack, but they were all men's clothes and much too big for her. He had blankets, but they were rough wool meant for sleeping outdoors. What this woman needed was proper care, the kind that required more than just camping supplies. He studied her face in the firelight. She was trying so hard to be brave, but he could see the fear in her eyes. Fear for her baby, fear of what would happen to them when he left, fear of asking too much from a stranger. "Where is your husband?" Thomas asked gently, using simple words and gestures to make himself understood. Ayana's face crumpled a little. She pointed toward the mountains and made a walking motion, then shrugged her shoulders to show she didn't know where he was or when he would return. Her husband could be dead, captured, or still searching for her. She was completely alone. Thomas made a decision that surprised even himself. "My ranch," he said, pointing toward the east. "You come with me, my house." "Help there." Ayana stared at him in shock. She had hoped for some food and maybe a blanket. She had never expected a white rancher to invite her to his home. In her world, such kindness between their peoples was almost unheard of. "You help me?" she asked, pointing to herself and then to her baby. "Yes," Thomas said firmly. "You need help. I help you." But even as he made the offer, Thomas knew he was taking a huge risk. His neighbors wouldn't understand. The local authorities might cause trouble. Some people would say he was a fool for trusting an Apache woman, and others would say he was a traitor for helping the enemy. Ayana seemed to understand the danger he was putting himself in. She shook her head slowly and pointed to herself, then made a gesture that seemed to mean trouble. Danger," she said, struggling with the English words. Thomas appreciated her concern, but his mind was made up. "No danger," he said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "You need help. That's what matters." He started gathering his things and packing up his camp. As he worked, he explained in simple words what would happen. "We go to ranch. Rosa there. Rosa help you. She good woman." Ayana didn't know who Rosa was, but the way Thomas spoke about her suggested she was someone who could be trusted. Still, the idea of going to a white man's ranch terrified her. What if it was a trap? What if there were other men there who wouldn't be as kind as Thomas? But looking down at her baby's pale face, she knew she was out of options. Her son needed help that she couldn't provide on her own. Sometimes survival meant taking risks that seemed impossible. Thomas brought his horse over and started loading his supplies. The animal was a gentle old mare who didn't seem bothered by Ayana's presence. That was a good sign. Horses could sense dangerous people, and this horse seemed calm. "You ride?" Thomas asked, gesturing to the horse. Ayana nodded. Apache people were excellent riders, though she had never ridden while holding a baby. Thomas seemed to understand her concern. He took a blanket and showed her how they could tie the baby securely to her body, keeping both hands free for riding. As the sun set completely and stars began to appear in the clear sky, Thomas helped Ayana onto the horse. She settled herself carefully, making sure her baby was secure and comfortable. The horse stood perfectly still, as if she understood the importance of her passengers. Thomas climbed up behind her, taking the reins and guiding the horse away from the lake. As they rode into the darkness, Ayana felt a mixture of hope and terror. She was putting her life and her baby's life in the hands of a stranger. Behind them, the lake reflected the starlight like a mirror. It was the place where two very different worlds had met, where desperation and compassion had crossed paths. Neither Thomas nor Ayana knew it yet, but this moment would change both their lives forever. The horse's hooves made a steady rhythm against the ground as they headed toward an uncertain future. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the desert, their voices carrying on the cool night air. The ride to Thomas's ranch took 2 hours through the moonlit desert. Ayana held her baby close while Thomas guided the horse carefully over rocky ground and around cactus plants. She had never been this far east before, and everything looked strange and new in the silver light. When they finally reached the ranch, Ayana was surprised by what she saw. She had expected something grand and intimidating, but Thomas's place was simple and practical. A small house made of adobe sat next to a barn and some corrals for horses and cattle. Everything was neat and well cared for, but not fancy. As they approached the house, a woman came out holding a lamp. She was older than Ayana, with gray streaks in her black hair and kind eyes that showed concern rather than fear when she saw the Apache woman. "Dios mío, Thomas. What have you brought home?" the woman said in accented English. This was Rosa, Thomas's housekeeper, who had come from Mexico many years ago. "Found her by Cottonwood Lake," Thomas explained as he helped Ayanna down from the horse. "She's got a baby and they're in bad shape. Soldiers hit her camp." Rosa immediately understood the situation. She had her own memories of soldiers and violence, of losing everything and having to depend on the kindness of strangers. She looked at Ayanna's torn clothes, her cut feet, and the weak baby in her arms. "Bring her inside," Rosa said without hesitation. "Quickly, before anyone sees." The inside of the house was warm and welcoming. Oil lamps cast a soft glow over simple furniture and clean floors. The smell of beans and cornbread lingered in the air from dinner. To Ayanna, who'd been sleeping in caves and rocks, it felt like the most beautiful place in the world. Rosa immediately took charge. She guided Ayanna to a chair by the fireplace and gently took the baby from her arms. With experienced hands, she examined the little one, checking his breathing and the color of his skin. "He's dehydrated and hungry," Rosa said to Thomas, "but he's strong. We can help him." She turned to Ayanna and spoke slowly in English, using gestures to help communicate. "You eat first, then clean, then rest. Baby will be fine." Rosa brought Ayanna a bowl of beans and cornbread along with fresh milk that was still warm from the cow. Ayanna ate slowly, trying not to make herself sick by eating too fast after days without food. As she ate, she watched Rosa care for her baby with gentle, practiced movements. The older woman had raised children of her own, and she knew exactly what to do. She gave the baby tiny sips of watered-down milk, just enough to start getting nutrients into his system without overwhelming his stomach. She talked to him softly in Spanish, her voice soothing and calm. "Rosa has a gift with babies," Thomas explained to Ayanna. "Lost 3 of her own to fever, but she's helped birth half the children in this territory." While Rosa cared for the baby, Thomas brought Ayanna some clothes. They belonged to Rosa and were much too big, but they were clean and whole. He also brought bandages and salve for her cut feet. "Rosa will help you get cleaned up," Thomas said. "There's a room in the back where you can sleep safely. Nobody will bother you here." Ayanna looked from Thomas to Rosa, still hardly believing that these strangers were helping her. In her world, such kindness between different peoples was rare and precious. She tried to find words to express her gratitude. "Thank you," she said in English, then repeated it in Apache. The words seemed too small for what she was feeling. Rosa led her to a small room behind the kitchen. It had a simple bed, a wash basin with clean water, and even a mirror, something Ayanna hadn't seen in days. Rosa brought her soap that smelled like lavender and a towel that was soft and white. "Take your time," Rosa said gently. "Clean yourself, put on the fresh clothes. I will watch your baby." Left alone, Ayanna finally allowed herself to feel safe enough to break down. She sat on the edge of the bed and cried quietly for everything she had lost. Her home, her possessions, the security of knowing where her family was. But these weren't just tears of sadness. They were also tears of relief and gratitude. When she washed her face and hands, the water in the basin turned brown with dirt and dried blood. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman looking back had hollow cheeks and frightened eyes. But at least she was alive, and her baby was alive. The clean clothes felt wonderful against her skin. Rosa had also left her a pair of soft shoes that were much too big, but would protect her wounded feet. When Ayanna emerged from the room, she felt more human than she had in days. In the main room, she found Rosa sitting by the fire with her baby. The little one was sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady and strong. His color was already better after just one feeding. "He's a fighter, this one," Rosa said with a smile, "just like his mama." Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table writing something in a ledger book. When he saw Ayanna, he nodded approvingly. "You look much better. Rosa takes good care of everyone who comes here." Over the next hour, the 3 adults worked out a simple plan using gestures, basic English, and Rosa's few words of Apache. Ayanna would stay in the back room until she was stronger, and until they could figure out how to find her family. Rosa would help care for the baby and teach Ayanna some English words. Thomas would ask around carefully to see if anyone had news of Apache people in the area. But Thomas also made one thing very clear. "Some of my neighbors won't understand this," he told Ayanna honestly. If anyone comes asking questions, you'll need to hide. I'll do my best to protect you, but there are limits to what I can do." Ayanna nodded. She understood the danger she was bringing to these kind people. In the Apache way, this created a debt that she would need to repay somehow, someday. As the evening grew late, Rosa prepared a soft bed for the baby using blankets and pillows. She showed Ayanna how to mix the milk so it wouldn't be too rich for the little one's stomach. She explained about feeding him small amounts often, rather than large amounts that might make him sick. "Tomorrow we see how he does," Rosa said. "If he keeps getting stronger, then we know he will be fine." That night, Ayanna slept in a real bed for the first time since the raid. Her baby lay beside her, breathing easily and making the small sounds that healthy babies make. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of a ranch at night, cattle moving around, horses nickering softly, the wind in the trees. But most importantly, she couldn't hear the sounds that had haunted her for days: soldiers shouting, things breaking, the cries of frightened people. For the first time since that terrible morning, Ayanna felt truly safe. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about Thomas and Rosa. These two people had no reason to help her and every reason to turn her away. Yet they had opened their home and their hearts to a stranger in need. Perhaps there was more hope in the world than she had thought possible. Ayanna woke up to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment she forgot where she was and reached for her baby in panic. But he was right there beside her, sleeping peacefully and looking much stronger than he had the night before. Rosa appeared in the doorway with a cup of warm milk and a gentle smile. "Good morning," she said in careful English. "Baby is better, yes?" Ayanna nodded and smiled back. Her son's color was good and he was making healthy baby sounds instead of the weak whimpers that had scared her so much. The food and safety had already started to heal both of them. Over breakfast, Thomas explained his plan for finding her family. He spoke slowly and used simple words while Rosa helped translate the parts Ayanna didn't understand. "I know places where Apache people go," Thomas said. "Sacred places, water sources, safe camps. I can ride to these places and look for your husband and family." Ayanna felt hope bloom in her chest, but also worry. "Dangerous for you," she said, struggling with the English words. Thomas nodded. "Yes, some danger. But I know this territory well. I know which areas are safe and which to avoid. And I know some Apache people who trust me from trading." He showed her a map he had drawn on a piece of paper. It marked all the places where Apache bands might gather after being scattered by soldiers. Some were near water sources. Others were in hidden canyons that provided protection. "We start close, then go farther if needed," Thomas explained. "Each day I search, then come back here at night." Rosa had a different job. She would stay at the ranch with Ayanna and the baby, teaching her more English words and helping her regain her strength. But Rosa also had connections in the Mexican and Spanish communities, people who sometimes had information about Apache movements. "My cousin works at the trading post in San Carlos," Rosa told Thomas. "I send message to him. He hears many things from many people." The first day of searching, Thomas rode to 3 different locations. At each place, he looked for signs that Apache people had been there recently. Cold fire pits, horse tracks, broken branches where people had passed through. He found old signs at 2 locations, but nothing recent. While he was gone, Rosa taught Ayanna new English words by pointing to objects around the house. "Table," Rosa would say, touching the wooden surface. "Chair," she would say, patting the seat. Ayanna repeated each word carefully, building a vocabulary that might help her communicate with other white people. Rosa also shared stories about her own journey to this place. She had come from a village in Mexico where soldiers had burned crops and scattered families. Like Ayanna, she had once been a stranger depending on the kindness of others. "Life has many hard chapters," Rosa said as they worked together in the kitchen, "but also good chapters. You are in good chapter now." On the second day, Thomas rode farther into the mountains. At a place called Eagle Spring, he found fresher signs, the remains of a recent fire and horse droppings that were only a few days old. Someone had been there recently, but he couldn't tell if they were Apache or other travelers. He left a small sign of his own at the spring, 3 stones arranged in a pattern that peaceful Apache traders would recognize as a friendly message. If Ayanna's people came to this place, they would know that someone was looking for them. The third day brought the first real hope. Thomas was checking a hidden canyon when he met an old Apache man named Crow Feather. who was gathering medicinal plants. Crowfeather spoke some English from years of trading, and he recognized Thomas as someone who dealt fairly with Apache people. "You look for scattered families?" Crowfeather asked. Thomas explained about Ayana and her baby, describing her appearance and telling what he knew about the raid on her camp. Crowfeather listened carefully, nodding as he recognized details. "I know this woman's family," Crowfeather said finally. "Her husband is my nephew. He searches everywhere for her, thinks maybe she is dead." Thomas felt his heart jump with excitement. "Where is he? Can you get a message to him?" "He is with small group, maybe 20 people, at old camping place near Willow Spring. 2 days' ride from here. Very careful, very hidden." Crowfeather agreed to carry a message to Ayana's husband. He would tell him that his wife and baby were safe with the Scottish rancher, who had always traded fairly. But he warned Thomas that the group was very suspicious of white people right now. "Soldiers hit 3 camps last week," Crowfeather explained. "Many people lost everything. Some lost family members. They do not trust easily now." When Thomas returned to the ranch that evening, he found Ayana and Rosa sitting by the fire. Ayana was holding her baby, who was now alert and looking around with bright eyes. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. "I have good news," Thomas announced, and he saw Ayana's face light up with hope. He explained about meeting Crowfeather and learning that her husband was alive and searching for her. Ayana began to cry, but these were tears of joy and relief. For days she had feared the worst. "When?" she asked. "When I see husband." "Crowfeather will carry message tonight," Thomas explained. "If all goes well, your husband could be here in 3 or 4 days." Rosa prepared a special dinner that night to celebrate the good news. They had beans cooked with chili peppers, fresh bread, and even some honey that Thomas had traded for. As they ate, Ayana tried to thank them in English, but the words seemed too small. Instead, she began to sing a soft Apache song, one that her grandmother had taught her about gratitude and the kindness of strangers. She didn't translate the words, but Thomas and Rosa could hear the emotion in her voice. "What does it mean?" Rosa asked gently. Ayana thought for a moment, then spoke slowly in English. "Song says, when heart is dark, kind people bring light. Light helps us find way home." Thomas felt something tighten in his throat. In all his years in this territory, he had never been called a light bringer by anyone, especially not by someone from a people he had barely understood before this week. That night, as Ayana settled down to sleep with her baby, she felt something she hadn't felt since the morning of the raid: peace. Her son was healthy and growing stronger every day. Her husband was alive and would find her soon, and she had learned that kindness could exist between people who seemed like enemies. But even as she felt grateful, Ayana knew this peaceful time was temporary. Soon she would have to leave this safe place and return to a world where Apache people were being hunted and scattered. The question was, what would happen to the friendship she had built with Thomas and Rosa? Would it survive in the harsh reality outside these walls? For now, though, she was content to listen to her baby's gentle breathing and to feel safe in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring her closer to reuniting with her family. Sometimes that was enough. On the 4th morning, Thomas was checking his cattle when he saw dust clouds in the distance. Someone was coming, riding fast across the desert. His hand moved instinctively to his rifle, but then he remembered that this might be the reunion they had all been hoping for. He rode back to the house quickly to warn Rosa and Ayana. "Rider's coming," he announced as he burst through the door. "Could be your husband, but we need to be careful." Ayana's heart started beating fast. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt nervous. What if her husband didn't understand why she had trusted white strangers? What if he thought she had put their baby in danger? Rosa helped her gather her few belongings while Thomas went outside to watch the approaching riders. Through his spyglass, he could see 3 Apache men on horseback, riding carefully but with purpose. One of them matched the description Crowfeather had given him of Ayana's husband. "I think it's them," Thomas called back to the house. 3 men moving like they know where they're going. Ayana came outside holding her baby, who was now healthy and alert. She stared across the desert, trying to make out the distant figures. Then one of the riders urged his horse faster, pulling ahead of the others. "Nalnish," she cried out, recognizing her husband's riding style even from far away. She started running toward the approaching riders, clutching her baby to her chest. Thomas mounted his horse and rode alongside her, ready to protect her if something went wrong. But as the riders got closer, He could see that the lead man had tears streaming down his face. This was clearly a husband who had thought his family was dead. Nalnish leaped from his horse before it had fully stopped and swept Ayana and their baby into his arms. For a long moment they held each other without speaking, just feeling the relief of being together again. Their baby, perhaps sensing his father's presence, made happy gurgling sounds. The reunion was beautiful, but Thomas noticed that the other two Apache men were watching him very carefully. Their hands rested near their weapons and their eyes showed the wariness of people who had learned not to trust easily. Crowfeather had come with Nalnish, along with another man named Running Wolf who was Ayana's brother. Both men dismounted slowly, keeping their distance from Thomas while staying close enough to protect their family if needed. "This is the rancher who helped your wife," Crowfeather said to Nalnish in Apache, then translated into English for Thomas. But Running Wolf is not sure why white man would help Apache woman. Thomas understood their suspicion. "I helped because she needed help," he said simply. "Any mother with a sick baby deserves help." Rosa came out of the house carrying a bag of food and some extra blankets. She had prepared supplies for Ayana to take with her, knowing that the reunited family would probably leave immediately. Ayana broke away from her husband long enough to take Rosa's hands in hers. "Thank you," she said in English, then continued in Apache with words that Rosa couldn't understand but felt deeply. "She says you saved her baby's life," Crowfeather translated. "She says she will remember your kindness forever." As the Apache family prepared to leave, Nalnish approached Thomas. The two men studied each other carefully, the Apache warrior who had been searching desperately for his family, and the Scottish rancher who had risked his reputation to help strangers. "Why you help my wife?" Nalnish asked in careful English. Thomas thought about the question. There were many answers he could give, about Christian duty, about human decency, about the universal language of parenthood. But in the end he chose the simplest truth. "Because it was right thing to do," he said. Nalnish nodded slowly. In his world, a man's actions mattered more than his words, and Thomas's actions had spoken clearly. "You're a good man," he said. Apache people remember good men. But as they talked, Running Wolf shared news that made everyone's mood turn serious. The military campaigns against Apache camps were getting worse, not better. More families had been scattered and many people were missing or dead. "They say all Apache must go to reservation," Running Wolf explained. "No more free life in mountains. No more hunting where our fathers hunted." Thomas felt a chill as he heard this news. He had thought the recent raids were just temporary military actions, but it sounded like the government had bigger plans. The way of life he was witnessing might be coming to an end. "What will you do?" Thomas asked. "Some people go to reservation," Nalnish said sadly. "Others try to hide in Mexico. Others fight until they die. No good choices." Ayana listened to this conversation with growing sadness. She had been so focused on survival and reunion that she hadn't fully understood how much their world was changing. The raid on her camp wasn't just a random attack. It was part of a larger plan to force all Apache people to give up their traditional way of life. As the family prepared to mount their horses, Ayana did something that surprised everyone. She took off a small beaded pouch that she wore around her neck, one of the few things she had managed to save from the raid. She handed it to Thomas. "This is medicine pouch made by my grandmother," she explained through Crowfeather's translation. "Very powerful protection. You keep it, remember Apache woman who you helped." Thomas accepted the gift with deep respect. He understood that she was giving him something sacred, something that represented her family's spiritual tradition. "I will treasure it always," he promised. Rosa also received a gift, a small piece of beautifully beaded leather that Ayana had somehow saved. "For baby shoes," Ayana explained, miming the act of putting tiny shoes on a baby's feet. As the Apache family rode away from the ranch, Thomas and Rosa stood watching until they disappeared into the desert haze. Both of them felt changed by the experience, though they weren't sure exactly how. "That woman has a strong spirit," Rosa said quietly. "Her baby will grow up to be strong too." Thomas nodded, fingering the medicine pouch Ayana had given him. "I learned something this week," he said. "I learned that all the stories people tell about Apache being savage and dangerous, most of those stories are wrong." Over the following months, Thomas would think often about that week when Ayana and her baby stayed at his ranch. He began to see the conflicts in the territory differently, understanding for the first time the human cost of the policies he had previously supported without much thought. But that understanding came with a heavy weight. Thomas now knew that he lived in a world where good people were being destroyed by forces beyond their control, where families were being torn apart in the name of progress and safety. The medicine pouch became a daily reminder of the complexity of the world he lived in, and of the importance of looking beyond the surface to see the humanity in all people, even those who seemed like enemies. Years later, when people asked Thomas about his views on the Apache people, he would tell them about a young mother who appeared at Cottonwood Lake with nothing but a sick baby and a desperate plea for help. He would tell them how that encounter taught him that courage and love look the same in every culture, and that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply help another human being in need. 5 years passed after Ayanna left Thomas's ranch with her family. During those years, the territory changed dramatically. More settlers arrived, more military posts were built, and the free life that Apache people had known for generations came to an end. Most Apache bands were forced onto reservations while others fled to Mexico or died fighting. Thomas often wondered what had happened to Ayanna, her husband, and their baby. He kept the medicine pouch she had given him in his shirt pocket, touching it whenever he faced difficult decisions. It had become his reminder to always look for the human story behind the political conflicts. The ranch prospered during those years, but Thomas found that success felt hollow when he saw what was happening to the Apache people. He watched as families were forced from their ancestral lands and crowded onto reservations where the soil was poor and life was hard. One morning in late spring, Thomas was mending fences near the same lake where he had first met Ayanna. He was thinking about her, as he often did when he worked near that spot, when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Hello, rancher." He turned around and saw a young Apache woman standing at the edge of the trees. For a moment his heart stopped because she looked so much like Ayanna. Then he realized it was Ayanna but changed. She was older, thinner, and her eyes held a sadness that hadn't been there before. "Ayanna!" Thomas exclaimed, dropping his tools and walking toward her. "I wondered if I would ever see you again." She smiled, but it was a tired smile. "I come to say goodbye," she said in English that was much better than it had been 5 years ago. "And to bring you something." From behind the trees came a little boy about 5 years old with bright eyes and his mother's beautiful smile. This was the baby Thomas and Rosa had helped save, now grown into a healthy, curious child. "This is my son, Kayenta," Ayanna said proudly. "He is strong because you and Rosa helped him when he was weak." Thomas knelt down to the boy's level. "Hello, Kayenta," he said gently. "You've grown into a fine young man." The boy studied Thomas with intelligent eyes, then spoke in careful English. "Mama says you are a good white man. She says you saved my life." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your mama's a very brave woman," he told the boy. "She saved your life by being strong and smart." Ayanna explained that they were leaving for Mexico the next day. Life on the reservation had become unbearable. There wasn't enough food, the children were getting sick, and the government kept making new rules that made no sense to Apache people. "Nalnish says we try to make new life in Mexico," she explained. "Maybe find other Apache families there. Maybe children can grow up free." Thomas understood why they were leaving, but it made him sad. These were good people being forced from their homeland through no fault of their own. "Will you be safe?" he asked. "We hope so," Ayanna said. "But nowhere is safe for Apache people now. We just try to find a place where children can be children." She reached into a bag she was carrying and pulled out something wrapped in soft leather. "I bring you gift," she said, handing it to Thomas. Inside the leather was a beautiful beadwork picture showing a man on horseback by a lake, with a woman and baby nearby. The artwork was exquisite, with tiny beads creating a scene that perfectly captured the day they had first met. "I made this to show my son the story of how a kind stranger helped his family," Ayanna explained. "Now I give it to you so you remember too." Thomas studied the intricate beadwork, amazed by the skill and time it must have taken to create. "This is beautiful, Ayanna, but are you sure you want to give it away?" "Story is more important than thing," she said. "Story lives in your heart now. Maybe someday you tell other people about Apache woman and her baby. Maybe help them understand we are just people like everyone." As they talked, Thomas learned what had happened to Ayanna's family over the past 5 years. Her brother Running Wolf had died in a skirmish with soldiers, Her husband's father had died of grief after being forced to leave his sacred burial grounds. Many of their friends had died from diseases on the reservation. But there had been good things too. Kayenta had grown strong and smart. Ayana had learned to read English from a kind teacher on the reservation. Nalnish had become a leader among their people, helping families survive the transition to reservation life. "Your husband is well?" Thomas asked. "He is good man, good father," Ayana said. "But his heart is heavy. Hard to be Apache man when you cannot hunt, cannot protect family the old way." Thomas wished he could do more to help, but he knew his power was limited. The forces that were destroying Apache life were much bigger than one rancher's influence. Still, he made an offer. "If you ever need help again," he said, "you know where to find me. My door is always open to you and your family." Ayana smiled, and for a moment she looked like the young mother he had first met. "I know," she said. "That is why I trust you with this." She took Kayenta's hand and spoke to him in Apache. The boy nodded seriously, then walked up to Thomas and handed him something small. It was a carved wooden horse, perfectly detailed despite being only a few inches long. "I made this for you," Kayenta said in his careful English. "Mama taught me how to carve. She says you like horses." Thomas accepted the gift with deep appreciation. The little horse was beautifully made, showing real artistic talent. "Thank you, Kayenta. I will keep this always." As the sun began to set, Ayana said they needed to leave. They had a long journey ahead, and it was safer to travel at night. But before they went, she had one more thing to say. "5 years ago, I thought all white people were enemies," she told Thomas. "You and Rosa showed me that was wrong. Some white people have good hearts. Some Apache people remember this." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe someday, when all this fighting is over, good people from both sides can live in peace. Maybe my son will see that day." Thomas hoped she was right, though it seemed impossible given the current situation. "I will pray for that day," he said. "And I will remember your family always." As Ayana and Kayenta walked back toward the trees where their horses waited, Thomas called out one last time, "Ayana, if you ever have more children, tell them about the rancher who learned that kindness has no color." She turned and smiled, raising her hand in farewell. "I will tell them," she promised. "And I will tell them that some people choose love over fear." After they disappeared into the darkness, Thomas stood by the lake for a long time, holding the carved horse and looking at the beadwork picture. In the moonlight reflecting off the water, he could almost see the scene from 5 years ago. A desperate young mother appearing out of the desert with nothing but hope, and a baby who needed help. That night, Thomas wrote a letter to the territorial newspaper, describing his experiences with Apache families and arguing for more humane treatment of native peoples. It was a small action, but it was what he could do. Over the years that followed, Thomas became known as someone who spoke up for fair treatment of all people, regardless of their race or background. He never knew if his words made any difference in the larger conflicts, but he knew they made a difference in his own heart. The medicine pouch, the beadwork picture, and the carved horse became treasures that Thomas kept for the rest of his life. They reminded him that even in the darkest times, individual acts of kindness could create light. They reminded him that every person has a story worth knowing, and that understanding usually begins with simple human compassion. Years later, when Thomas was an old man, he would sit by the same lake and tell visitors about the Apache woman who had taught him the most important lesson of his life, that we are all more alike than different, and that helping each other is what makes us truly human.